no. If you agree with it, yes.
Well, Congressman, I thought you were referring to the service members who were on the list.
I'm making it clear, any list that targets a city or state in the United States, if you bring terrorists from Guantanamo Bay, wouldn't it be reasonable to conclude that that can enhance that city's ability to be on one of those targeted lists?
I think there are any number of factors.
Would you not agree that that would be a factor that would enhance that ability?
I think there are any number of factors.
Would that be a factor?
There are any number of factors.
But you would disagree that that would be one of those many number of factors?
Congressman, I don't agree or disagree. I say that there would be any.
So then you, as the Attorney General of the United States, you do not have an opinion whether or not bringing terrorists from Guantanamo Bay and locating them in the city would have any capability at all of putting that city on a hit list by ISIS? You don't even have an opinion on that?
Congressman, I think there are any number of factors.
I'm asking you, would that be one of those factors?
I believe I've indicated there'd be any number.
No, you've indicated you wouldn't answer the question. And Madam Attorney General, I think that's atrocious that you don't even have an opinion of that. Let me ask you this, then, in the limited time I have, if you'll answer this question. You talk about data. We have certain of these events in Ferguson and Baltimore that you'll have an event and that will escalate into violence, and you talked about the police. Have you attempted to gather any information about outside organizations that may come from outside the community that may come into those communities and also escalate that violence?
We do gather information on individuals as well as organizations.
Do you have a report that you can provide to this committee of your investigation and what that has included with a list of those organizations?
Congressman, we do not generate a report. What I was indicating was that in our review, if a matter is referred to us, particularly if there was a violent issue.
Now, I'm not talking about whether it's a crime. Do you have any information as to whether or not, you talked about police escalating the violence, do you have any information you can supply this committee that these outside groups may be coming in and also escalating that violence?
Congressman, the reports that we do would not focus solely on one factor.
So you haven't focused at all on outside groups that could come in and escalate the violence?
Sir, if a matter is brought to our attention, it would come under our review.
But you haven't done any?
We don't have a report for you on that, sir.
But have you done any investigation?
Sir, if a matter is brought to our attention, it would come under our review.
Well, Mr. Chairman, with that, I yield back without getting a single answer to a single question we posed.
The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Cohen, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm going to be like Ms. Lee and ask you a lot of questions because there's a lot on my mind.
I'm sorry, sir, I can't.
I say I'm going to ask you a lot of questions because there's a lot on my mind and we have limited time. In July, a young man named Darius Stewart was shot and killed by Memphis police. He was a passenger in a motor vehicle stopped for a traffic citation. Yet he was asked to get out of the car. They looked at him. They put him in the car. A tussle occurred. He was shot and killed. The DA asked the grand jury to indict voluntary manslaughter. The grand jury chose not to. How that was presented, who knows? Obviously not as well as a ham sandwich could have been presented. I've asked the Department of Justice to look into it. Your first response is you monitor the case. Now that the case has gone through the grand jury process and not gotten the result that the DA wanted, I would like to ask, as I've asked in writing before, for the Department of Justice to look into this case and see if civil rights violations may have occurred.
I would like to have my staff reach out to you and get that information, sir.
Are you familiar with the case?
I'm not currently familiar with the case, although we have a number of similar matters under review.
Well, I hope you'll become familiar because it's a situation that many people in the city of Memphis, including myself, feel was a miscarriage of justice, equal to any of those others in the United States. And for some reason, it hasn't risen to the radar of the United States Attorney General, and I hope it will. The DEA took a 2015 National Drug Assessment Summary, and at that particular summary or study, most agents said marijuana was like at 5% total risk to the society, and meth and heroin were the most serious drugs challenging them and the American people. Do you agree that we should spend more time, our law enforcement, working against meth, heroin, and opiates, and not marijuana?
Congressman, I think that with respect to our narcotics laws, what we try and do with both throughout the entire Department of Justice and at the DEA, is focus on the specific problem in a specific region and devote resources to that. We currently have a crisis regarding heroin use and opioid abuse in the country, and some communities have been consumed by that particular problem. There are, unfortunately, some communities that still have problems with methamphetamine, so there might be a different focus on the type of drug,
but marijuana is not
depending
a
upon the
place
issue.
where marijuana is not where cities have people needing marijuana and knocking off 7-Elevens to get some money to buy their marijuana. They're doing that for meth and heroin. Is that not right?
Certainly, we've seen violence associated with meth, with heroin, with prescription drugs as well. The type of violence associated with the marijuana trade typically occurs at the dealer level, at the import level, and I certainly have seen cases where there's been significant violence at that level.
There is, and the reason there's that violence is because just like prohibition, we made it illegal. It's not because of the marijuana and the need to have it on the street level basis where people need to commit violence to get money to buy a drug. It's because we did the same mistake with marijuana that we did in the 20s with alcohol. The public demanded it. The racketeers, the criminals got involved. We made them rich, and they used guns to protect their properties. That was a mistake. Do you agree marijuana should not be Schedule 1 in the same category as LSD and heroin?
Well, with respect to the issue of scheduling, that is typically determined based on whether or not there is another use for the product. And I think that there would have to be studies by the FDA, among others, to determine whether or not a scheduling change in any drug is necessary.
But don't you agree that you have to change the scheduling from 1 to get the studies? I mean, there are lots of young people, like one of my constituents, Chloe Grauer, who died waiting for the opportunity to get Charlotte's Web. Lots of people who'd like to get cannabinoids. You could talk to Montel Williams and what it does for multiple sclerosis, or any number of cancer patients who it helps with nausea or allows them to eat and have an appetite. Don't you agree, unlike Chuck Rosenberg, that medical marijuana is something serious and should be looked at as an aid to people in our society to get through difficult problems and not considered a joke?
Well, certainly the issue of medical marijuana is significantly different from the criminal enforcement or use of marijuana, and certainly the Department supports the FDA studies in the use of cannabinoids, or the substance within marijuana, that have been shown to have some efficacy.
We're about to run out of time. I hate to cut you off. I would hope you would look into initiating, which you can, taking it off of Schedule 1. It's crazy to have it with LSD and heroin, and should not be there, and it should be studied. RFRA has been used to allow groups to discriminate against LGBT people, and it's been based on a 2007 DOJ Office of Legal Counsel opinion that said RFRA could be used to grant exemptions to federal discrimination laws governing federal programs. Will you commit today to instruct the Office of Legal Counsel to review and reconsider the 2007 OLC legal opinion that's being used today to justify taxpayer-funded discrimination counter to the President's executive order?
I would like to look into that issue. If I could have my staff reach out to you and get more information on that, I would appreciate that.
On that same issue, holdovers from the Bush team, there was a holdover from Bush in the commutation office for 6 years. That's why the President got hardly any recommendations for commutations. Can I have a commitment from you to give more resources to people to study prison records and to facilitate the expeditious sending expeditiously recommendations to the President for commutations of the thousands of people whose sentences should be commuted, who are serving time for long-term drug offenses, nonviolent drug offenses that aren't serving the American people by having them be in federal prison?
Congressman, over the last 18 months, the Department has, in fact, taken a significant look at the staffing and resource needs of the Office of the Pardon Attorney and sought to provide additional resources so that every application that comes through, whether it be for a pardon or clemency, can be considered quickly and efficiently.
But it hasn't done that. And let me remind you what Dr. King said. Justice delayed is justice denied. Every single one of those people serving a day in prison who will eventually get a recommendation is having their justice delayed and denied.
And on that note, the gentleman's time has expired, and we will recognize the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Attorney General Lynch, on February 2nd, 2014, Kate Duvall, Chief Counsel to IRS Commissioner John Koskinen, learned that Ms. Lois Lerner's hard drive had crashed and they didn't have all her emails. Mr. Koskinen and the IRS waited until June of that year, June of 2014, to tell Congress. In that 4-month time period between when they learned that her hard drive had crashed and they didn't have all her emails, and June when they told us, in that 4-month time period, Mr. Koskinen testified twice in front of Congress and did not disclose the fact that they knew her hard drive had crashed. 1 month later, after they learned her hard drive had crashed, in March of 2014, March 4th of 2014, the IRS destroys 422 backup tapes. So just so you understand the fact pattern, they know on February 2nd, Lois Lerner's hard drive has crashed. They don't have all her emails. 30 days later, they destroy 422 backup tapes. And they destroy those 422 backup tapes with 3 preservation orders in place. In fact, one of those preservation orders came from the Justice Department. 10 months before that, you had told them, hey, preserve all the documents, preserve all the emails, we got an investigation going on. There were 2 other preservation orders as well. So 3 preservation orders and 2 subpoenas. Now, that sure looks like John Koskinen and the Internal Revenue Service concealed information and destroyed information. But just last month, you guys sent us a letter telling us you're not going to prosecute anyone in the IRS targeting scandal, and you specifically say in that letter, our investigation revealed no evidence to deliberately conceal or destroy information. So here's what I can't figure out. They learn on February 2nd, 2014 that Lois Lerner's hard drive had crashed and they don't have all her emails. 30 days later, with 3 preservation orders and 2 subpoenas in place, they destroy the backup tapes. So if that's not evidence of deliberately concealing and destroying information, what is it?
Thank you, Congressman. With respect to the matter that you've raised, as we set forth in our letter, we did review the issues surrounding the Ms. Lerner's emails and the backup tapes. As with every criminal investigation, we are looking for evidence of criminal intent, and we are looking for evidence of the specific reasons for why the actions that you note.
How many times do you have direct evidence of intent in any type of other fraud investigation? I mean, you weren't going to get something. What were you looking for? An email where John Koskinen sends an email to the guys in the tape room and he says, destroy the tapes? You had 3 preservation orders. One of them came from the Justice Department. They knew there were problems with their hard drive and that they didn't have all her emails. And 30 days after that, they destroyed 422 backup tapes. That's not enough to take it to a grand jury?
Certainly, Congressman, it certainly was a matter that was under review, and as we've outlined in our letter, the findings of that review.
If it wasn't deliberate intent to destroy and conceal, what was it?
Congressman, as we've outlined in our letter, the findings that we had based on those actions.
Here's what you said in your letter. Justice Department's investigation uncovered substantial evidence of mismanagement and poor judgment. What I just described, was that evidence of mismanagement by John Koskinen?
Well, Congressman, I'm not going to attribute it to just one individual, because I believe that certainly there would be others that would have been looked at.
Was it evidence of poor judgment when Mr. Koskinen's chief counsel knew that Lerner's hard drive had crashed? He comes and testifies in front of Congress and doesn't tell us that and waits 4 months to tell us? Was that evidence of poor judgment?
I can't speak to what was in his mind when he testified before you. What I can speak to is the information that we provided to this committee outlining the steps that were taken in the Department of Justice investigation.
What was it going to take?
And the conclusions that were drawn. As we've indicated.
Here's what the American people want to know, Attorney General. What was it going to take before you would take this to a grand jury? Would Mr. Koskinen, would he have had to wait 5 months before he told us? 6 months before he told us? 8 months before he told us? Would they have had to destroy 423 backup tapes? 450 backup tapes? Would they have to destroy every single backup? Would they have to destroy more evidence? What was it going to take before you were going to take this to a grand jury with 3 preservation orders in place, 2 subpoenas in place? They have knowledge that there's problems with their hard drive, that they don't have all their emails, and they destroy the backup tapes. I mean, if that fact pattern doesn't warrant going to a grand jury and prosecuting, tell me what would.
Certainly, Congressman, that fact pattern was part of the investigation, as were a number of other facts in there. And as we outlined in our letter, we outlined not only the investigative steps that were taken, but the conclusions that we drew from.
So who are you referring to when you say substantial evidence of mismanagement and poor judgment? Who? Seems to me the guy at the top is the guy responsible. So are you saying Mr. Koskinen had substantial evidence of mismanagement when he didn't inform Congress and when he destroyed 422 backup tapes? Is that substantial evidence of mismanagement on the part of John Koskinen?
I'm not going to attribute it to a specific
Who would you
individual.
attribute it to? Someone's got to be responsible, because let me ask you one last question, if I could, Mr. Chairman. So you sent a preservation order to the IRS in May of 2013. March of 2014, they destroy 422 backup tapes. Now, if a private citizen gets an audit notice from the IRS, and then 10 months later they destroy the evidence, are they going to be prosecuted?
It would depend upon the evidence of intent and why they...
Really? I bet the average American says, of course they're going to be prosecuted, and yet, you guys with that fact pattern wouldn't take it to a grand jury. Who mismanaged what? That's the question I want to answer. Who's responsible? Someone has to be.
I think we've outlined in our letter the
No, you
findings
haven't.
of
You
this
said some.
investigation.
I want to know if it's Mr. Koskinen, the guy at the top, the guy who runs the IRS, the guy who was presiding over the IRS when we destroyed the 422 backup tapes. Is he responsible?
As we've indicated in our letter, there was substantial mismanagement. As we've outlined and when we indicated we would provide this information to the committee, we're also happy to provide a briefing to the committee on other questions that you may have about this matter.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair will now recognize the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Lynch, I want to commend you and the Department of Justice on the fact that 70 individuals have been charged since 2013 for conduct related to foreign fighter activity and homegrown violent extremism. General Lynch, this committee has previously heard how ISIL and other terrorist organizations field potential recruits in publicly accessible social networking sites via encrypted messaging platforms and also over voice over internet apps. Are these encrypted private